professional staff development panel. Sorry, started a little early. Yeah, just
I never know if it's on. It's on, right? People are asleep in the audience. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. My name is Eugene Fryer. I'm the Director of Esports and Gaming at Texas Wesleyan University.
My name is Sean Burney. I'm the esports director at St. Clair College.
I am going to be modding. So we're just going to go over some questions. And I mean, if you guys have any questions, raise your hand. Sean will walk down and hand you the mic and we'll go from there. So we're going to start with how can a student transition into a full-time position?
So I'll start this one off, and some of you who are just in the awards thing, you probably heard me talking about a couple of my students. I'll talk primarily, first of all, about Dan Banner. He's our production director at the school. He actually started working for me as a volunteer, and I basically told him from the beginning, if you prove yourself, create the content, create the numbers that I can use to bring to my bosses, I might be able to fight for you to get some compensation. And, you know, he really took that to heart, and he went crazy with broadcasting, creating a ton of content, getting a lot of viewership, creating some really amazing things that I was able to turn around and bring to my administration, to my bosses, and say, look, this is a student that we currently have about to graduate. I would like to hire him after he's done, because if we lose him, our production is going to fall off a cliff. And that was really the reality of it. So that's kind of the mentality I've always kind of tried to imbue into my volunteer staff or my staff members, like kind of prove what you can do and you will have me at your back fighting for you. And I do that with all of my staff. A lot of you have probably seen Chris here as well. Chris is my assistant director. He originally started as a volunteer. He came to me and said, how can I help the program? I'm like, I don't know. What do you want to do? And I gave him two options. I said, well, we don't have anybody selling sponsorships for us, and we don't have anybody doing recruiting for us. He's like, wow, sponsorships, that sounds tough. I can do the recruiting one. So he started doing that, and he's absolutely killed it, right? He's gone out, he's found us players from all over Canada. Last year was our first year of active recruiting, went out and found us players from all over Canada, whereas typically we were just drawing from local, you know, commuter students, basically. And now this year, he's gone even further, and we've got students coming to us from Europe, from South America. Even we're stealing a couple of your American students over and bringing them into Canada, right? But it was kind of the same thing. I told him, go out there and give me the data that I can turn around and fight for you, and go to my bosses and fight for you to get compensated properly. So that's kind of the way things were done at my school. And I figured I would just give that as an example. Obviously, it's not the same everywhere. So maybe some others here have different point of view of how it can be done.
I think one quick point of clarity, Sean was not talking about kidnapping when he mentioned taking American students to Canada. It was just recruiting for his program. I know what you meant. I just want to make sure they're on it. For us, honestly, so I'll have two answers to it. One, like the plain answer of if you're a student and you want to get involved in esports, the biggest thing that I've seen is you have to understand that like what you do in your program is not the same as what jobs currently are. If you want to do the kind of stuff that like a director or the director, coordinator, coach, different titles at different schools, different pay, but all do the same thing. You're responsible for everything. If you're a streamer or a player or a do this one thing or two things in your program and you want to get into one of those jobs, you have to learn about everything. Now, as the area matures and grows, things will hopefully become more focused, where we're not asked to do an unnecessary amount of stuff in our roles, but that's the reality of it right now. But two, and this is one that speaks to what's happened more frequently in my specific program, we don't have a lot of people that want to work in esports. We have a lot of people that love esports, that want to compete, that want to create content, and that want to go be a teacher or want to go be an accountant and want to still engage with esports, but they don't want to coach, they don't want to do analyst work, they don't want to compete. So what we talk to them a lot about is similar to what I would say for the first group too. Look at what you want to do and do like what am I good at for that job? This is what we're going to have as one of the assignments in one of the esports classes we're teaching this fall. Find a job online that's like a dream job for you. Look at what is required of it. What are you already good at? What are you already great at? What do you know nothing about? What do you know a bit about but could get better at? Start with that and then work towards the goal of, I want to be as qualified as possible for this job. Now, the weird kind of crappy thing about it is your level of qualification for a specific position is less based on how good you are at stuff and more based on who else applied for the job. But you want to put yourself in as positive a position as possible and have all the skills possible to get whatever job you want. So we do a lot of individual career coaching with our students. So it starts with where do you want to go next? And then we kind of try to build a plan to help them get there. That's what we do on our campus.
Thanks. I think I'm going to step back just and ask how many staff you have on your program. And I'm going to start. I have about 25 staff, but that does include volunteers, interns, part-time and full-time. So full-time, we have 2 full-time staff. I have 3 assistant student workers, and then the rest are either paid student workers or volunteers. The volunteers are probably the biggest ones that I have. That includes our production team, our social media marketing, and then our volunteer coaches too.
We have 2 full-time employees, me and the assistant director of esports. We have 2 student assistant hourly employees, up to 20 hours a week. One of them works with our competitive teams. One of them works with our content teams. We have 5 work study employees, people that are awarded a work study award on their FAFSA. And then we have, I don't know how many it'll be this fall because we've had a few students graduate, but we have a handful of, I'm going to do air quotes right now, scholarship positions. Some of y'all that have heard me talk about this have heard me mention this. Our school costs $36,000 a year. Our scholarships are capped at giving out 12 up to $1,000 each. So I don't like to call them scholarships because that's not really a scholarship. But we've kind of repackaged those into $500 a semester. You're going to work 2 to 3 hours a week doing Twitter, doing Instagram, TikTok. We had a scholarship dungeon master in our program last semester that was creating custom content for our stream. Like, what is the thing that you would want to do that would help our program? Let's build a job around it. We had around 4 of those, 5 of those last semester. So we're at 2 full-time staff and around 11 or 12 student staff.
So I'll start with where we were in 2017, and then I'll talk about where we are now, just because I don't want to necessarily scare anybody here who might have like a brand new program and they're like, that's impossible, I'm never going to get there. So when I started in 2017, I was hired alone as a solo staff member, and I wore all the hats. Okay. Over time, through the success we had building up the data and fighting for people and getting more people, now we're up to a point where this year we'll have 5 full-time staff members in our varsity program. And then in addition to that, we have, depending on whatever number we get finalized, we should have between 10 and 20 work study students involved in the program. And work study in Canada, I think it's similar from conversations I've had, but work study for us in Canada, it's a kind of a government program, and students can work for 24 hours a week, max at minimum wage. Minimum wage for us right now is $15.50. So that's kind of what our student work study get. On top of that, we do when we cap out our work study, then we start utilizing scholarship money to hire additional staff members. So we should have around probably 10 to 20 people in that kind of a position as well. Usually we're using that for assistant coaches, sometimes like a head coach. They'll get kind of like it's almost like a token scholarship. It's still pretty solid. Our tuition's a lot cheaper. So tuition for us is about $2,000 to $3,000 per semester. And the coaching scholarships we give are $500 per semester. So somewhere around 25%, 20 to 25% tuition is kind of our scholarship workers. And then if we're really capped out on budget and still have people that want to get involved, then we rely on volunteers. And we do have a handful of volunteers. Mostly those are for people that are wanting to work with our program that aren't students, because we just don't have the ability to pay non-students to work in smaller capacities. So for example, we've had coaches who just, last year we had our Rainbow Six coach wasn't a student. So it was, he just wanted to coach the team and work with us. And I told him like, look, I don't have budget to compensate you anything. He's like, I don't care. I just want to coach the team. Right. So we have everything from volunteer, scholarship, work study, and full-time pay as well. And then one thing we do on a very rare occasion is we do have contractor pay as well for certain types of individuals. So for example, for us, we don't have an internal graphic designer, but we do have a graphic designer on a contractor retainer that we pay $1,000 a month to do, or 600 per month to do graphic design work for us. And he works for a marketing company. You know, he's somebody I've known for a long time. So there's a lot. Basically, I'm trying to just kind of illustrate that there's a lot of different ways to do things based on how your institution works, where the pools of money are, where they aren't. So try to get creative, and you can find ways. The number one thing that I'll say, and I've said this to a lot of people here at the conference that are still those one-person shows, and I know that's common. That's how a lot of programs start. The sooner you can start delegating out jobs, you know, take one of your 7 hats off and give it to somebody else. The sooner you can do that, the sooner you're going to start seeing like tremendous leaps in the amount of success you can have as a program. Okay, I'm going to run back. Okay, total enrollment at each school. That's the question that was asked. So my total enrollment is around 15,000. Yeah, so my school, St. Clair College, colleges and universities are a little bit different in Canada. They're actually 2 distinct things. So colleges, whenever you hear that in Canada, it's specifically referring to schools that offer primarily 2- and 3-year diploma programs. So we do have a small handful of 4-year degree bachelor programs, but for the most part, 99% of our students are on 2- or 3-year diploma programs. So we're sort of somewhere between what you would call a community college and a 4-year university. We're kind of somewhere in between.
I am a state school 4-year program, and in person we have just under 16,000, and I'm not sure how many online because we do a lot of non-traditional students. But yeah.
We are a private religious affiliated university, affiliated with the Methodist faith. We have, including graduate students, around 2,200 students on our campus. And just undergrads, we have, it's like between 16 and 1,700. Our demographics are shifting, but I know over the past 5 years that undergrad population, or the median age of our students used to be 28. We had a lot of students that were adults with families that had a boss that said, you know, finish out that associates and get a 4-year degree and I'll give you a promotion. And they came to class on our campus and then went home. But it's skewing more to traditionally college age students now. And the median age is closer to 22, I think, or so. So we're starting to get normal, but not yet.
Did someone else have a question?
The total number of varsity players and club players that you have. Should I repeat that?
Yeah, you might as well repeat it. I'm here.
Okay. Don't waste the trip. So similar to the enrollment question, I just wanted to know how large that these actual teams are that you're fielding. I can imagine probably in proportion, he's going to have a larger team than him, but I'm curious as to the number of staff compared to the number of actual players playing.
Sure. I started with 17 students in 2019, and then the next year we grew to about 75. My facility can only hold 16 PCs right now. And so we had to scale back because of that, and just make sure you know your bandwidth, because between practices, matches on the same days, we had to drop about 2.5 teams because of that. And so we're sitting around 60 students in person, about 60.
For our competitive teams, right now we have 2. We're hoping to add a 3rd by fall of 23. On our Valorant team, we have 7 students. On our Smash team, we have 5 students. We're hoping both those numbers. We're recruiting for the fall. That's who is currently enrolled and planning on returning. And we're hoping to figure out what our 3rd team is going to be. But we also have a stream team that's around 9 students. And we have a content team, not production, award-winning production, but like creating goofy crap for TikTok, and let's make goofy YouTube videos. We have around 5 or 6 students on that. We had at the end of the semester. It's going to be 3 returning. And then we have several student organizations in our department too. And the student leaders in those orgs are considered, we don't pay them, but they're considered staff as far as the support they get and what they're included in. So there's about 7 more of them. Our numbers at the end of last semester were somebody that had a specific role in our program. We were at 48 students.
So we're kind of going into transition right now because we just built a new facility. But when I first started in 2017, it was just me. I was able to recruit a solid team of volunteer coaches, about 5 of them, and we had somewhere around 30 to 35 players in the program, just varsity competitive. And that's kind of where we've been for the last 4 years, but next year we're really growing a lot. So we've added an academy program for next year. So kind of like a junior varsity / academy program. So we'll have 5 varsity teams. Each one of those varsity teams has at least a head coach, but most of them also have an assistant coach, but that's all either scholarship or volunteer. And then at the academy level, we'll have somewhere around 65 players. And the academy players are all on partial scholarship, whereas the varsity program, a lot of them are on, some of them are on like half or full tuition scholarships. So that's kind of the differentiator for us. Whereas academy is just kind of $500 per semester across the board, like a blanket scholarship offer. All of the academy teams have at least one head coach as well. That's just the way that we require it. If we're going to have a team, it needs to have a head coach, like a one point of contact. Sometimes that is a player coach. We've done that as well. And usually player coaches will get their player scholarship and a coaching scholarship as well. They'll get one of each. So even the academy players, some of them will end up having like 50% of their tuition covered through that. So that's kind of the competition side. On top of that, we have our production team has a full-time staff member with he'll have somewhere around 3 to 5 work study students working for him, as well as 5 to 10 scholarship or volunteer students as well. And then we have a marketing team. Our marketing team, which Chris leads up, usually has somewhere around 2 to 3 work study students working for him as well, doing social media work or, some minor graphic design stuff or videography, photography, video editing, stuff like that. So that's for the most part, kind of how our staff and program looks.
What should you do to go from part-time to full-time if you're not full-time yet?
My mentor told me a long time ago, if you want to see a university or a company's priorities, look at how they spend their money. This answer is going to look a bit different from institution to institution, but how is esports or whatever it's classified as in your campus, how is it valuable to the division that you report to and to the university in general? As I'm sure a lot of you know, when esports first started with the varsity is like a taboo way to say it, but like the varsity department type programs, it was a lot of schools that look like mine. But now there are a lot of schools that are bigger and have a lot of resources. But it started out with schools that wanted to find students and they were like, video games, huh? Enroll? Yeah. That was valuable to those schools. I don't think that's healthy or sustainable. But the people on those campuses found a way to sell that because we're working with audiences. The people above us rarely understand what we do. I'm very, very, very fortunate with the vice president that I report to that he's been a gamer his whole life. But if I start talking about esports, he's like, nah, I don't know what you're talking about. So even I think I'm in a position that maybe some people aren't of like, he's like, no, gaming in general is important in its community and it can bring people, its academic success can come from that. But a lot of us have people above us that are like, what? Like I know even when my job transitioned, I was an assistant dean of students before I moved over to being director of esports. And we're a small school, but I was responsible for like 5 different areas. And I kept most of them when I started my esports job. Because my boss was like, yeah, you can still advise the student government, still be responsible for orientation, and still help with large campus events while helping with strategic planning. And I was like, I don't think that's gonna work, man. And after a few months, he saw that. But I'm saying all that to say, I'm sorry, I'm starting to ramble right now. I'm very, very sorry. He understands and he still doesn't understand. So the trick in moving from part-time to full-time is how can you make the people above you understand the value you're bringing at the very least, if not the stuff that you're actually doing. They don't have to understand the nuts and bolts of it, but how is it valuable to them? How can they sell it to those above them? That's the big thing for me.
Yeah, I'll kind of keep going on that and then I'll go grab your question after. That's okay. And keep going on that same line of thinking. One of the questions I ask to new programs when we're having conversations is, what are your goals? And I ask that as a loaded question because what ends up happening is they tell me what their personal goals are. But what esports directors or head coaches or whatever you call yourself at your school, what you need to realize is that you have your personal goals, but your school has goals as well. And a lot of program directors don't actually know what their school's goals are. When I was hired at St. Clair College, I was pitching this idea of an esports program to them back in 2016. At that time, the only any information I could find online was really only Robert Morris. That's all I could really find. So I was using that to pitch to them. And what I was doing when I was pitching, though, was not telling them what I thought. I was more so starting conversations and seeing if they would finish the conversation for me. Right. And what I realized quickly was that the people I was talking to, their interest was in student life specifically. And that interest is going to be different at every school. So we had Northwood win like every award, and their interest is very much like winning championships. My school, they didn't really care about winning championships in the early days. We try to now. Those are my personal goals. I've had to work on the school's goals for 4 years first to make sure they were getting what they wanted before I could start getting the resources to do what I wanted to do. So it's really only in the last year and this year coming up that now it's like we've done enough for the college to prove and to get the resources. Now I can start doing the things I like to do, which is try to beat Cody at Northwood. So that's kind of the loaded question, that if you can't answer that question right now, if you don't know what your school's goals are for the esports program, you need to figure that out. Some schools, it's purely get bodies in the door, in which case, there's ways to do that. Some schools, it's we want, more earned media views and views on Twitch and, impressions on social media. There are ways to do that. And you're going to build your program much differently depending on how you're tackling those goals. But my recommendation to you, especially if you're starting off and you're part-time and you want to become full-time, or if you're full-time and you're trying to get more staff hired, is don't focus on what goals you want to try and accomplish for yourself. Focus on accomplishing the goals for the school, because that's going to go a lot further in getting you the resources that you need. Yeah.
I'll tell you one thing with me. I was solo going into COVID, and going into COVID, we had 6 teams at the time, and it was a compete. And we were looking at, we got to do different stuff because we're freezing a lot of students out, but we don't have time. It's the trick that happens in a lot of jobs, but especially esports. Oh, we have 17 games today, and we have 3 computers and 50 students, and we got to make it work. And we got to go. So we were like, we got to figure this out. And then COVID hits, and half of our competitive players were international students who went home. So we didn't have competitive teams, and I wanted to keep a job. So I was like, I got to figure something out, So some of the stuff we had on the back burner, I started to do over COVID, got success with the stream team, with some of the content stuff, growing out some of the orgs. But then as we were remote for a year on my campus, well, from March 2020 until spring 2021, I worked from home because my boss was like, you don't have teams competing. We're trying to lower the footprint on campus. Don't come to campus. And I was like, I'm cool with that. But as we started getting close to like coming back to campus, I started to realize that I couldn't do what I was doing before and what I'm doing now. So I had an honest conversation of, what do you want me to stop? Because I can't do it all. And again, I have a good relationship with my boss, so it's a bit different. But like, I had to frame it to him that way. Like, I physically cannot do both of these things. So you guys need to tell me what to stop or give me help. And thankfully, he was able to give me help. That's what I was talking about. If you want to see a university's priorities, like how they spend their money, they can tell you there's no money for stuff. But if they like it, there's money. To find a way to show that value, that's the huge thing. What is it going to bring to the school's mission, the school's goals, all that kind of stuff? I think that'll help with that.
So we're based under athletics, and so bringing people in is how we get everything going, honestly, for us. So I don't know if you guys are based on our athletics or anything. Did you guys have to hit a certain number before getting some extra help, or was it just, we see that you need help, we're giving you help?
Well, for me personally, we're struggling with this right now. We're kind of at a plateau. We had the same number of students as we did last year, and we have to go to our university and ask, do you want us to stay the same, or do you want us to grow? Do you want us to try and bring in the big sponsorships like Boise and $300,000 Army? That'd be awesome. But you have to ask your university, and do you want to stay the same, or do you want to grow? And obviously we hopefully all want to grow. I want to grow. and just trying to explain to them that you can't do it by yourself, and that though listing out all of your duties on a piece of paper and writing it down, showing them, it'll really show you and your university what you need help with.
That last one she just said is so important. And a lot of people aren't doing it. Just because you were hired for a specific job description, like you got hired, you applied to a job that had a certain description that they decided, doesn't mean that's the job you're actually going to work. So once you get into the job and you do it for a little bit, start writing your own job description to bring it back to your bosses and say, like, I know you hired me for these 3 things, but like those 3 things are actually 25 things that I don't think you quite understood when you hired me. And make sure they understand. And that's for all of your staff. You know, I'm having this conversation right now. So in Canada, athletics, especially collegiate athletics, is not treated even remotely the same as it is here in the US. You know, like we don't have paid coaches even at our top universities. We don't have like a paid sports coach. It's very rare in Canada. Like that doesn't really exist in collegiate athletics even. So we're getting to a point where we want paid esports coaches, but they're like, well, we don't even pay our basketball coach. Why would we pay our esports coach? And then, so I'm trying to have to explain to my bosses, like, look, it's not just showing up to 1 hour game a week. Like there's a lot more to coaching a team than 1 hour. Cause they're like, I've even had them respond exactly like this. What would they even do all day? You know, like about when I say we want to hire a coach, what would they even do all day? Like you only play your games in the evening. Like what would they even do? Like, well, there's a lot. There's recruiting and there's watching VODs and there's staying up to date on the metas and there's learning the rule sets and registering for leagues and there's all kinds of other stuff, but they don't understand that, right? So we have to write it out and make it very explicit for them. So that last one is like a small one that might have flown under the radar, but make sure you're doing that, writing up job descriptions for yourself and for every position that you're going to try to fill in your program.
We it's a dirty word on our campus sometimes, but we have a quota. We have a number we have to hit. It's and you, I'm sure you've worked this out on your campus, but for those that are unaware, what typically happens for these quota systems is there's a magic number of how much money a student actually pays to the university when you strip away all the aid and all that kind of stuff. So the funding for a program is based on the salary or pay if it's not a salary job, but the pay of the employee, the benefits, and the operating budget. How does that match up with the magic number and how many people do you need? So ours was based off of our first year. Our recruiting goal was 10 students. We hit 13 our first year and we've gone up every year. This past fall, we were at 33. We stopped getting extra. We've never gotten any extra money, even though we're tripling. So I consider myself to be a hardworking, diligent person, but I was also like, I'm not going to break my neck to keep bringing people in if my budget's not changing. Because especially before I had help, I can't help all these people by myself, you know? So we have a number, it didn't change, but when we ended up getting the assistant director last fall, we did give up some of our operating budget to go towards his salary, but it was also fortuitous timing because we had somebody retire that worked in our division that his spot wasn't getting filled. So some of the money that went to that salary and our operating budget went to get the pay for the new role. So we do have a quota, a number or whatever, but that's the angle that we took to find the funding for the position.
That's the list of our questions that we were, oh, go ahead.
Okay. Say you've hired your workers, you know, you've hired them already, you have your student workers doing this and that, and fall's coming up and it's go time, like getting ready to start going with all of this. My question is, how do you prepare those student workers and the staff that works underneath you? How do you prepare them for the role that they are doing? Like, what kind of professional development resources do you give your faculty and your student workers so that way they feel confident that they can do the job that they were hired to do and that they feel like they are not, you know, fish out of water, especially if it's a student worker and they're a little like scared to do it, but they want to learn? What resources do you give them?
I personally have a student handbook for my players that we give out. We sit them down with specifically our players and go through everything and their expectations. For our student workers staff, we're in the development of creating the same thing for them so that when new students come on, that they just understand how it. And Chase Newcomb yesterday had a really, he has a huge binder that he does a boot camp that it's a couple days for freshmen and junior. It's a little bit freshmen and sophomores is a little different than their seniors and juniors, but that way they go through everything for development and it creating a handbook. If you need ideas or if you have questions about that, I encourage you to reach out in the Discord and ask for Chase's handbook because it's amazing.
We do a lot of cross training is one of the big things we do. I see the main part of my job as being a recruiter, and that's not just for finding students for the program. That's for recruiting help because I don't know. I don't understand social media. I like it as a user. I can't teach you how to get better, but there are professionals on our campus that can. I don't want to show up to them though, like, hey, I know we worked here 2 years and never really talked. Can you train my students? I don't want to do that. So it's building those bridges, creating those relationships, strengthening those. Whenever I'm able to get on a search committee for a job, I don't care if I have nothing to do with that job. I'm going to try to carve out time to do it so I can meet somebody on day one so we can come look at the computers, all that. And this sounds real shady. I'm not really that shady, but it's like being smart with your environment of like, hey, we have this relationship. Let's go to lunch and all that kind of stuff. But also like, hey, you're really good at this. Can you help out with this? Can you come into one of our staff meetings for an hour and go over some stuff? So it isn't always like long-term stuff, but very, very specific things like that. Also leveraging the handbook things are really, really good idea. We've done trainings before. I come from a background in residence life prior to working at my current university. And we used to do 10 to 14 day long trainings before every semester. And it's like, this is your life for 2 weeks. And we'd go through all this stuff and you kind of had to, because it's getting ready, safety, security, getting ready to open the halls, all that kind of stuff. I started doing that at the beginning of our esports program. And it was like, this doesn't make sense for us. We're so small and we don't fill all of our staff positions with new hires until mid-September. So what makes sense for us? You know, so I still use some of the resources from some of the traditional trainings with them. I still do some of the activities, but it's getting a lot of help from other places. But then also we're fortunate because there's a lot of universities around us as well. But like also sometimes if I can get Dylan, the director at UNT, to hop in a video call with our students and say the exact same thing that I would say, that sometimes is more valuable to them than me saying it. So how can you foster those relationships to help bring in some more support as well is something I think about. But a lot of our attention is individually focused. So if you're going to do social media for us, yeah, we're going to get you some social media help, but also we want you to be a good employee and a good worker. So we're going to talk about responsibility, diligence. What does your workflow look like? Because no matter whether you're doing TikTok or events or helping to run a team, there's a beginning, middle, and end of the project. You know how to do that. And let's go through that kind of stuff. We do that a lot with our students.
Mine's going to be kind of reiterating a lot of this stuff, but you know, we've over the last year, especially, we've started developing a coach's handbook, specifically for the coaches in our program, especially as now our coaching staff has grown from what used to be 5 to this year, potentially somewhere around 15 or maybe even 20 people. So having something that they can refer back to, definitely is valuable. The only thing I will say with the handbooks from experience is that if you just hand somebody a handbook, they're not going to read it. So, you know, you have to build that in somewhere, into some sort of orientation where you can at least kind of go through the major sections with them, to make sure that they're seeing it. So with that being said, like we're adding this week, we're bringing all of our staff and players in a week earlier than we traditionally have done. So we'll have the Monday of the week will be like a coach's orientation and boot camp, where we'll go through all the major things together. And then for the remaining 4 days, we'll spend the next morning doing a quick orientation with students as well. And for the remaining 3.5 days, the coach will take their players the rest of the way. So that's something that we've kind of added in this year for our program. I would recommend, if you can, to try to do something similar to that. What we run into, and you might have heard this in one of the other conversations before, especially as a Canadian school, we start a little bit later. Our first day of classes is usually the day after Labor Day. So unfortunately for us, what that means is that oftentimes we have day one of classes and day one competition the same day. So it's been really rough in the past, and generally we get off to a pretty slow start with a lot of our teams because they're oftentimes, hey, we're on a team together. Good to meet you. All right, let's play. Hopefully we win. Like that has happened a few times. So we're trying to bring them in earlier and get them to know each other earlier and this kind of stuff. So we've added that boot camp weekend. And then the final thing that I'll say is that depending on what level of training you're trying to give, there are some options out there to maybe even send your students off for like a couple days to a school that's more established. I know Doc at Boise State has done this with multiple students. I'm planning to send even though we just run production of the year, I'm planning to send Dan, my production guy there, to spend a few days at Boise State and kind of learn what they're doing. And vice versa. If Doc wants to send students to my school eventually, I'll take them and we'll teach them what we can. So look around in your local area, especially if you've got other programs who are, maybe a couple years ahead of you, see if they'll walk your students through and maybe give them an afternoon training session or something like that. Right. So that's another thing that I would try to explore if I was in your boat trying to get things started and get things off the ground.
And to kind of jump off of that too, like I think about you connecting me with Dan.
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
even if people aren't local, even if you don't have the funding or the time to go visit, I reached out to Sean and I was like, hey, we want to go more production stuff. I don't know how to do that though. Like, do you? And he was like, yeah, I know some stuff, but here's who you want to talk to. And me and Dan had a fantastic conversation where he gave me some like, you're on the right track with this stuff. You're really good with this. Here's stuff to look at for this other stuff. And it was like, okay, cool. So while that isn't training, and I know you were asking about students specifically, but finding that out for yourself and for your students. Yeah, other staff in the, yeah. So that's what I'm saying. So whether it's for you or any staff, grad, student, whatever, you don't necessarily have to be the one to package the training or professional development to give it to them. You have to find solutions of who can get me this information, and whether it's traveling to a school, like Sean was saying, or just this community is so amazing to me. When I used to work in student affairs, just student affairs, traditional student affairs, people would help, but to a point. But I've had people like send me budgets. Yeah, here's exactly what we spent, man. Good luck. Let me know if you need help. And it's like, this is cool, or people being very upfront with like, yeah, this might work for you, but this was horrible for us. This is how it messed. And then you got to ask the question, And I think people are very receptive to responding to DMs in Discord or emails or whatever to help with that. So it's just figuring out what areas you do want to learn in, and then finding who on your campus or in your area or just in NACE can help get that information, I think.
Is anyone here not a member of NACE currently? So you guys have access to the private or the public general chat. Use that as much as we all check it, and we'll answer questions and go into DMs if you need to. But definitely use it for any and all questions, because there's always someone on the leadership team or even just general members willing to help out. There was a question in the back, I think. Did you still have a question?
The other thing quickly too, like Discord is one, and I know a lot of people have different opinions, and Eugene just said, don't say Twitter, but I was going to say Twitter. So whether we like it or not, collegiate esports currently lives on Discord and Twitter. So if you aren't active on those platforms, do yourself a favor and get active on those platforms. If you want recommendations on who to follow, like a good way to do it if you're not a Twitter user, follow somebody like a Doc or a Coach Antor and just go and look at who they follow and just follow all the same people. And then you're going to build your, then every day when you log into Twitter and you just scroll through a little bit, spend 5 minutes a day, just scroll through Twitter, you're going to pick up a lot of stuff on there. Some of it is, so hopefully you've got some thick skin,
It's toxic and horrible.
There's some toxicity and, but if you cut through that toxicity and that kind of stuff, you're going to find some like extremely helpful content. Like I generally come up with documents that I'll share on there. For example, this time of year, everybody's starting to think like, which leagues am I signing up for next year? And there's 300 of them, right? So something that I generally do each year, and I know Antor already put one out as well, is I'll generally do all of that work of compiling all the leagues that I'm aware of, when the deadlines are to register, who can play in them, all that kind of stuff. And I put that on Twitter. So you know, if you're not on Twitter, you're going to miss stuff like that. And that's just the unfortunate reality of this industry sometimes, is that, yeah, you really, I know that there are programs existing out there that aren't on Discord or Twitter, and I don't know how it happened. I don't know how it works. I can't imagine it. It really is important. So, you know, even if you need to reach out to somebody who's fluent in one of those two platforms, because you're not, I would say it would be time well spent to learn how to use those two platforms and use them at least on a basic level, and log in daily and check, you know, scroll through at least for 5-10 minutes a day on each one.
And I'll say that Sean brought up Adam Antor and Chris Haskell as two people. Sean's also a great person to follow too. There are people that get discussions going, share resources, but get discussions going, and you don't even have to reply. Just looking through and reading, and you'll see people say like, "We're a new program," or like, "No, that's the worst idea ever," and you'll know who you want to learn more from, and then just following up with them, finding their contact info. A lot of people, and I do love this about Twitter. It's like the one thing I like about Twitter. When you go to people's pages that are connected in Twitter, you'll find other ways to contact them. It isn't like you're gonna have to like add them on Twitter or DM or something. You'll find a lot will have Linktree or their email address or something like that, so you can connect with them. But that is a good thing to look at. Absolutely, I would say that with Discords as well. I'm in the maximum amount of Discords you can be in, not being a paid Nitro member. Most of them are muted, but I schedule time to go through them. I don't want that burn all the time. So like they're all muted. All the not NACE and not my school. The rest of the esports one I'm in are muted. But I've scheduled time to go through professional orgs, to go through collegiate orgs, and just like I want to make sure I know what's going on, because it is where it absolutely is where it lives. And I think he had his hand up in the back.
All right, I'm coming.
So Eugene mentioned the fact that a lot of times people above us don't necessarily understand esports or video games in general. How do you marry the duality of the fact of the very online Discord and Twitter being a central hub for esports to being able to relate that information to perhaps administration who are very much not in tune with that, and kind of showing them without showing them where the esports space is beyond that?
We created a document for our administrators. It's about a 5-page document that shows our successes and what we are about. And that way we kind of dumbed it down for them, took out some of the gaming language, but just showing how we've grown. And that way we actually update it quarterly to give it to them and present to them. And it shows where we are and how we're trying to improve. And I think sometimes those documents might help them a little bit. I can show you after what ours looks like, just to give you a general idea to help you out.
It's something that I say often to new schools, or just to people in general, like wondering about collegiate esports. It's one of the big differences between an esports director and an athletics director. An athletics director doesn't have to do that internal education that an esports director has to do, right? And an AD doesn't have to go to the other administrators and be like, so this is what the sport of basketball is. You know, they all have an innate like idea. They've played it at some point in their lives, right? But we have to do that. So that's really difficult. And I had one other thing I wanted to say, but I'll let Eugene and I'll probably come back to me. I had something important and I lost it. Go ahead.
This is highly contingent upon who you're talking to and what their experience is. But one thing that I found, the senior admins that don't understand Discord, but understood forums and how they worked in the past, calling Discord, this is a forum, but look at all the people that are online and look at how it's broken down. It's not a page with these and then the post. It's a thing on the side. And then like, it's like a post, you know, that kind of help. But also showing the access that you can get with that. Cause I'll use the athletics kind of counterpoint too, in that the football coach on a college campus isn't necessarily in the local professional football team's community server or forum or email list or whatever. But like, yeah, this is different than things that you typically use, but look at what it does for our campus. And also look, here are some local pro orgs or some different teams, and we have access to this stuff as well. So showing how it's familiar to the things they're comfortable with, but showing the growth also is a big thing that I've done with Discord. But honestly, I haven't talked to my senior admins about Twitter because I hate Twitter. So I can't really help you with that one. I'm sorry.
So the one thing I was going to say is that especially when you're fighting for resources and stuff, and especially if they don't understand esports, is try to come up with ways of creating visual comparisons between the value you're creating and something they understand. So if your boss or whoever you're talking to, if they really know football, compare something about what you're doing to football. So for me, for example, we had a broadcast this year. Our Rocket League team was really good, and we played against West Virginia in a match, and it was hosted on the Psionics, which is the developer, on their Rocket League channel. That stream had 24,000 viewers watching at one time. Like, so unique's probably 30 or 35,000 unique people tuned in. That's something that my school in traditional athletics has never ever done in our history. Our school's existed since 1967. We've never done something like that ever, so but just putting the number, we had this many views, wasn't enough. I had to like get them to visually see it. So I'm like, look, Little Caesars Arena in Detroit that just opened up, imagine we were playing and we filled the thing with people watching collegiate esports, and they're like, wow, that's crazy. I don't think we could ever do that for sports. I'm like, yeah, exactly. We're doing something that you can't do for sports. Therefore, that big budget athletics gets, maybe we can get a chunk of it, So when sometimes it's hard to explain exactly what esports is, and sometimes it's not worth it. Instead, could just use a comparison that they already do understand, is what I'm trying to say.
Do we have any last minute questions? We have about 4 minutes left before they kick us out.
Let me say one parting thought. For y'all's professional development, I think it's really easy to get caught up in, how do I coach better? Or what things should I use for my team? That's not what it's all about. Like with our assistant director that we have, I'm sending him to student affairs conferences because I want him to learn how to do leadership things and planning things. And I'm not saying like student affairs, everybody, but like, what are different places you can send people? What are Google trainings that you can find that will help with, like I mentioned, workflow stuff before. One of the things that I'm going to do this year, that I'm going to get my assistant director to do eventually, but like training on how to be a scrum master, like agile coaching type stuff. What are different things that are out there and that are accessible to you, whether they're free or have a cost? You're in charge of your budgets mostly, right? That you can allocate the time and resources towards doing. It doesn't have to be just in esports. It will help. I swear to you on that.
Yeah, and never mind.
Well, thank you for joining us as we talked about. If anyone has questions afterwards, hit us all up on Discord or throughout the rest of the convention, and hopefully we'll see you guys all at Up Down tonight. I'm really excited for that.
Also, like the legislation stuff and for members at 3.
Make sure,
Yeah, I guess.
we've had problems in the past where members leave before the vote. Don't be that member. We need every vote. All the votes are important. So if you're a member, make sure you're there. Make sure you're ready to cast your vote. Thank you.